Running back rankings in today's video. Last week, I brought you guys my top 60 wide receivers for Dynasty Fantasy Football, doing an update of these positional rankings after the draft, after free agency, where so much has changed about these guys' situations. In today's video, I'm going to be bringing my top 40 running backs for Dynasty Fantasy Football in the summer of 2026. And before we get into these running backs, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so that you don't miss a video. I am also live streaming every Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, doing a Dynasty startup mock, talking with the chat, answering any questions that may come up in there. It's a ton of fun. I would love for you to come hang out with me again Saturday night, 8 p.m. Eastern. So subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos and you don't miss those streams. And turn on notifications so you know every time a video is released and whenever I go live. Now let's get right into it with the S tier. Now, a little preamble here. I did this with the wide receivers. I'm going to do it with the running backs. These tiers essentially just signify that I view these guys all fairly similarly, right? I would always rather have a guy at the end of a tier with a plus on top in value, if you're looking at it from a trade perspective, than the guy at the beginning of the tier without that plus. So I view these guys all fairly similarly if they're in the same tier. If you would rather have Bijan over Gibbs, I am not going to argue with you about it. I have my reasons for why I have Gibbs at 1. You'll hear those in a second, but I just want to get it out there that these tiers basically mean that I don't see a huge difference in the guy at the top versus the guy at the bottom. Starting with Jahmyr Gibbs, he has put up back-to-back 21 point per game seasons over the past 2 years, and top 3 overall finishes at the running back position. Obviously, we know that he has an elite weekly ceiling, that crazy game against the Giants last year with 55 points. Jahmyr Gibbs also leads the league in touchdowns since he came into the league in 2023. So these 3 seasons that he's been in the NFL, he has the most touchdowns, most total touchdowns of any player, more than Derrick Henry, more than Saquon Barkley, more than Christian McCaffrey, more than Bijan Robinson, with 49, averaging 16.3 touchdowns a year. Obviously a high-powered offense. The Lions actually have the easiest strength of schedule this season based on projected win totals, which I think is big for Gibbs, for the running back, for the hammer in this offense. You also have David Montgomery out of town. Isaiah Pacheco coming in, who is just frankly a worse running back, and I think will take less work from Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs, over the past few years, he was up to a 56% of the carries in 2025. I don't think this jumps to 70, but I really see a scenario where it jumps to 65. Maybe his efficiency goes down, right? Maybe he's not averaging 5 yards per attempt. Maybe it's 4.8 or something like that, right? But I could definitely see an increase in workload for Jahmyr Gibbs. And he's my 101 in redraft this upcoming season. He's my RB1 for Dynasty Fantasy Football. I just think the sky is the absolute limit for this guy. And in terms of like a 4 to 5 year run, I think we could see Christian McCaffrey levels of usage and productivity for Jahmyr Gibbs. Bijan Robinson is not to be scoffed at, though, whatsoever. Almost 22 points per game this past season in 2025. Back-to-back top 3 overall running back finishes, just like Jahmyr Gibbs. These guys don't miss games either. He has the volume in this offense. The target share should be there, an almost 20% target share. This past season, 19.8 target share for Bijan in 2025. The exact same story with the handcuff for Jahmyr Gibbs is there for Bijan Robinson as well. Brian Robinson is a worse running back than Tyler Algier. That is just a fact. So now Bijan was sitting at 61% of the carries. Could that go up to 65? Could it go up to 70? I could definitely see it. I think that he gets vultured less this year than he did last year. So clear-cut top 2 running backs. I don't think you can argue otherwise. I think for redraft as well, if you have a top 2 pick this season, you're going to be very, very happy because these 2 guys are going to be the 2 guys that go there. And I think that they are 2 hammers that are going to be super reliable for fantasy football in 2026 and for dynasty purposes beyond that. Now, the biggest concern for Bijan is, of course, the strength of the offense, right? You don't have a Jared Goff in there. You don't have a history of this offense being very good. Kevin Stefanski comes in. I think that should be a positive for this offense, him coming in at head coach. But the Tua Michael Penix battle is just not something to be excited about. That is literally the only reason I have Bijan behind Gibbs, is because it's just less certain the strength of the offense. And when it comes to the running back, who both these teams are going to run through the running game most likely, I want the guy in the better offense. But it's razor thin. Again, like I said at the beginning, I don't mind if you have Bijan over Gibbs. For me, it's just that question mark about Tua and Penix. Obviously, Bijan over the past 2 seasons has shown that he doesn't need elite quarterback play to be an elite running back. That's where the tiebreak is for me. But Michael Penix and Tua Tagovailoa being the quarterback room for the Falcons does not make me worried about Bijan's production. It's the sole reason why I have him behind Jahmyr Gibbs. Moving into the A tier, I want to make it very clear once again. If you want to order this tier differently, which I'm sure the bulk majority of people who watch this video will, it is completely fine with me. I do not have any issue if you want to put Love at RB3. I don't have any issue if you want to put Genty at RB3. Me personally, I prefer Hampton to those guys in a vacuum. That's just how I feel about it. I'll try and explain my stance on the matter, but I do not hate Ashton Genty. I do not think Jeremiah Love is a bad guy to rank at RB3. I just prefer Amarian Hampton. With Amarian Hampton, we have a very small sample of a full workload in 2025. He did not have that full workload for very long. Najee Harris got some work at the beginning when Amarian Hampton was kind of ramping up there. If you look at games where he had a majority snap share and a majority share of the carries in the offense, right? That full workload, which I don't think anybody could argue we would project for him going forward. He was just under 17 points per game. Now, if you remove week 1, which I'm not saying you have to, but for the purposes of the argument I am trying to make, week 1, his first ever NFL game, you remove that, and it's 18 points per game. This includes a phenomenal floor that Hampton has as a receiver out of the backfield. So what I have with Hampton here is a guy who checks all of the boxes coming out of college, right? He has the size to be a workhorse at the NFL level. He has the athleticism. He has the receiving upside, right? He had that profile at UNC, and he gets the draft capital going in the first round. Then you have an insanely exciting offense, right? We know that Justin Herbert is incredibly talented. Mike McDaniel coming in, being a guy who did so much good for fantasy football in Miami for Devon Achane, for a very limited quarterback. What can he do with an elite quarterback in Justin Herbert? You have the offensive line that should be back healthy this upcoming season. A lot of that work that Hampton put in was with no Rashawn Slater. All of it was with no Rashawn Slater, their elite left tackle who tore his patellar tendon, I believe it was, in training camp of last year. And Joe Alt was out for a lot of the back half of the year. So you also have no solidified running back in this backfield to threaten his workload at all. So I view the Chargers as a huge breakout offense potential in 2026. And I think that that's going to be a very common take as one of these teams that could really take a jump into being one of these elite offenses for fantasy football. And Amarian Hampton is just going to benefit a ton from that because Kamani Vidal and Keaton Mitchell don't scare me in terms of his workload. I saw enough from him as a rookie to believe that he has that elite, RB1 overall finish ceiling. Now, I'm not saying that that's the likely outcome. I think that his ceiling exists there. I think it exists for Ashton Genty as well. I really believe in Amarian Hampton. I really believe in him for Dynasty Fantasy Football and for redraft as well. And so that's where I'm at with him. Now, that is not a slight whatsoever to Ashton Genty, who I have as my RB4. He is absolutely primed for a huge year 2 breakout after the absolute disaster that was the 2025 Las Vegas Raiders. Ashton Genty, in his rookie season, put up 3.7 yards per attempt here on his carries. 3.7, you can just see it there. 3.06 of that came after contact, meaning he's getting hit by the defense within the first yard of the line of scrimmage every single play on average. It was just an absolute disaster. The offensive line, the quarterback play from Geno, largely because of the offensive line and the lack of weapons, Brock Bowers being hurt. But he showed a really, really good floor as a receiver, right? Averaging 4.3 targets, 3.2 receptions, just over 20 yards. And he also showed the spike week potential. He had that massive game against the Texans towards the end of the year, a big game in week 4 as well, which was against the Bears, yes, of course. And the Clint Kubiak coming over from the Seattle Seahawks, plus the Cousins-Mendoza combo, I think that just gives a super strong floor for what this offense can be. And Ashton Jeanty, the Raiders don't need to be a top 10 offense for Ashton Jeanty to be great in 2026, right? They just need to not be bottom 10, I think. And he's going to be a phenomenal pick at ADP for redraft, and he's going to be a phenomenal asset for Dynasty. So I'm really bullish on Ashton Jeanty going into next year. Once again, I felt that a lot of this offseason with my Hampton over Jeanty stance, I've had to talk down on Jeanty. I'm not doing that anymore because that's not how I feel. I think Amarian Hampton is phenomenal, and that's why I have him at 3. It does not mean I think any less of Ashton Jeanty. I think he's a phenomenal Dynasty asset to be rostering. Jeremiah Love is my RB5. With Jeremiah Love, you really are just leaning into the draft capital and the prospect profile. Phenomenal prospect profile from Jeremiah Love, up there with Ashton Jeanty and Bijan Robinson and these kind of guys that we've seen come out over the last 5 years or so. These profiles, running backs drafted in the top 10 of the NFL draft, they just don't miss. They have a better hit rate than any other position at, draft capital that you can possibly name. Now, the situation's not ideal, of course, right? This could easily be a, carbon copy of Ashton Jeanty as a rookie, right? You have a bad offense. You have difficult quarterback play. Jacoby Brissett and Carson Beck probably gets a look at some point towards the end of the year. The Cardinals definitely have better weapons than the Raiders dealt with last year. They probably have a better offensive, infrastructure and coordinator with Mike LaFleur as opposed to what the Raiders dealt with Chip Kelly. But I don't see this offense being good enough. Tyler Algier is also super solid. Like, he's no slouch. And I think that they will resist giving Jeremiah Love this massive, huge workload in year one. And then on a bad offense, it worries me. But that's a redraft take, right? For Dynasty, he fully deserves to be in this tier because long-term, he is that Bijan, Ashton Jeanty, Jahmyr Gibbs level talent. And once the Cardinals, if they hopefully do end up in a situation where this is a half-decent offense, kind of like what Bijan deals with year to year, he'll be great for fantasy football. So if you drafted Jeremiah Love with your 101 this offseason, I would feel really, really good about it. Even if in year one, he's not a top 10 running back for fantasy football, right? Ashton Jeanty was the RB14 overall, I believe, as a rookie, and he's held value incredibly well. So no worry with Jeremiah Love's value. I'm just a little low on his projection for year one. Devon Achane as my RB6, 20 points per game in 2025. He was the RB5 in points per game. He was also the RB5 overall. Obviously, I had him in the Flock League. An incredible run with Devon Achane this past year. Just signed that big contract extension. 4 years, $68 million, I believe it was. That puts him third in average annual value, just behind Christian McCaffrey as well as Saquon Barkley. It is nice to know that they are committed to him long term, right? That tells me that we should have zero concerns about any sort of workload, zero concerns of holding him out of games or not giving him a full workload because they don't want him to get hurt in case they're trying to trade him and this kind of stuff. I'll talk about it with Breece Hall in a little bit here as well. I think that just job security and situational security is a good thing always, even if it is security to a bad roster, which is what the Dolphins are, right? They are such a question mark. They probably project to be a bottom 3 offense in the NFL. I don't think that's, a hot take whatsoever. It's Malik Willis, Devon Achane, and nothing at wide receiver and nothing at tight end. So there's also no good way to predict how Malik Willis is going to fare as a full-time starter. If he just completely falls on his face like a Justin Fields of last year with no weapons, and he's just taking off and running all the time, that's not going to be good for Devon Achane. There are legitimately zero serious skill players in this offense outside of him. And so the Dolphins could easily be a team where they score 12 points per game and Achane has 6 touchdowns. Will Malik Willis check it down as much as Tua? Will there be as much designed short game stuff with Malik Willis and a new offensive coordinator compared to what Mike McDaniel used to do? There's a lot of questions for this coming year, but he is in this tier because of talent, because of the contract stability, and because of his age. He is still 24 and a half years old in a 3-year window. This is the middle of his prime. If the Dolphins can be a top 25 offense, I don't think Achane is going to be phenomenal this coming year, but he also has the chance to just have an insane workload. And so that's what holds him up into this A tier. He is slipping down a slight little bit. I just cannot ignore the 20 points per game that he put up this past year and the fact that he's 24 and a half years old. I can't ignore it. Moving down into the B tier, this is going to be the elite veteran tier, is what I'm going to call it. If I'm not competing, if my roster isn't competing in 2026, if I'm not primed to compete for a championship in my league, I want to be selling these guys. I don't want to touch them on my roster at all. They are purely contending assets, starting with Ken Walker, who I do have as my RB7. He is the one big projection in this tier, right? Much more so than James Cook and Jonathan Taylor. Those guys are probably much safer options, and that's why in the tier, if you want to put Ken Walker at 9 and bump up Taylor and James Cook, absolutely fine by me. I completely get that. 16.5 points per game he put up in 2024, right? 2 seasons ago in 11 games. Then last season, Kubiak comes in and he gets the Charbonnet vulturing, right, in 2025, and he was not good during like the regular season for fantasy whatsoever. You can see a few spike weeks, but a lot of red as we go through here. Obviously, we all know the story with Ken Walker. Charbonnet tears his ACL. He gets the full workload in the playoffs. He goes on an absolutely insane run, wins the Super Bowl MVP, and he gets the nuts landing spot in free agency with the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that, and this is also coming from a place of being in the best ball streets right now and looking towards redraft for 2026, I feel like people have just completely forgotten about what a running back for Andy Reid can do, right? It has been since 2017 Kareem Hunt. That's 9 years since there was a rusher of 1,000 yards, and since there was a 1,000-yard rusher on an Andy Reid offense in the regular season. Isaiah Pacheco got there, I think in 2024 on the Super Bowl run. But a regular season 1,000-yard rusher, 2017 Kareem Hunt was the last time Andy Reid had that. Now the Chiefs go out and they pay this guy, right? They give him the contract. They commit to him in free agency. And we know that Ken Walker has the talent, right? We saw it all last season, even when he wasn't scoring fantasy points. It was completely a deployment strategy by the Seahawks, which did work. We cannot, fault them for that. But that's what caused the frustrating year. It was not Ken Walker's talent. Zach Charbonnet is really good in the role that he played, right? I don't think we need to say, oh, well, Ken Walker had to have, taken the whole workload from Zach Charbonnet and should have been having, 70% of the carries if we want to draft him, as a top 7 dynasty running back, or if we want to take him at the 1-2 turn of redraft leagues. He needed to have beat out Zach Charbonnet. I don't really think that's the case. I think we can look at the context and say, okay, but now on the Chiefs, who is going to be that Zach Charbonnet? It's not going to be Imari DiMarcado. It's not going to be Emmett Johnson, who they just drafted in the 6th round maybe. It's not going to be Brashard Smith, who was a 7th round pick a year ago. So you have what we know is an elite talent at the running back position. In terms of breakaway, in terms of, forcing missed tackles, all this kind of stuff, Kenneth Walker is phenomenal. You have him on a really good offense, which, by the way, there's no concern about Justin Fields, in my opinion. Mahomes is all but guaranteed at this point to play in week 1. He is minus 700. Those are the odds on FanDuel for him to start week 1. Plus, the NFL gave the Chiefs a primetime game in week 1. I think it's Monday Night Football against the Broncos. You can choose to think that's noise and not read into it. The NFL is not scheduling Chiefs Broncos Monday Night Football week 1 if they think there's a chance Justin Fields plays. I feel like I can say that with some certainty. So, Ken Walker, I really believe in. I think he has a massive year. James Cook at running back 8. He came into 2025 and everybody was worried about touchdown regression, right? He scores, 16 rushing touchdowns in 2024 on just 207 carries. That's an insane touchdown rate. Then he signs the extension in training camp. Instead of holding up his touchdown rate, he adds 100 carries and 600 rushing yards to his totals from a year ago. Leads the league in rushing. And his touchdowns did regress. He went from 16 to 12, which is probably more sustainable, right? Being in that 10 to 12 range. It just didn't matter that he regressed because he added so much as just a pure raw rusher, right? It is little to no receiving work, only 33 receptions, about 300 yards. this past year. But this offense wants to run the ball. They want to work through the run game. It's easily projectable, right? I think he's very safe because now you have the offensive coordinator who's now the head coach. It's very easy to project how this offense should run very similarly to how it did a year ago. They're committed to him with the contract. I'd feel very good about James Cook on my contenders. Now, the guy that I feel a little less good about is going to be Jonathan Taylor, who I have as my running back 9. Obviously, you can see just an insane start to the season for him. He was on pace genuinely for one of the greatest running back seasons of all time. Before the bye week, which was week 11, he was at 27.4 points per game, 6 yards per carry, averaging almost 2 touchdowns every single week. Now, as we got towards that bye week, there was a lot of talk in redraft circles about the Colts' schedule, right? Particularly the run defenses that they were going to be facing in the second half, and those teams being very difficult run defenses to play against. It did kind of come to fruition, right? You can see a big drop off. There is also the Daniel Jones injury in week 14 to consider there. It was 2 not very good weeks before that, obviously. But he had 13.8 points per game post bye week. So this stretch here, 13 points per game, a huge drop off from the 27.5 that he was doing pre-bye week. As a fantasy and dynasty community, I do find we tend to be extremely biased towards what just happened in the year prior, which isn't always wrong, obviously, right? I mean, the best predictor of future points is previous points, right? I just think we tend to be too focused on just the past season when projecting the following one or when projecting 3-year windows for Dynasty. And I think it sometimes causes us to ignore the full picture. On this generational run that the Colts had in the first half of the season, where Jonathan Taylor was averaging 27.5 points per game, the Colts were, by efficiency metrics, the best offense ever since the 2007 Patriots, almost 20 years ago, right? That is not sustainable for any team, let alone one whose quarterback is coming off an Achilles tear. And Daniel Jones's mobility really helped the offense to function, right? That was a lot of what allowed the Colts to be really, really good last year, is that Shane Steichen really used that Daniel Jones rushing threat and his mobility to their advantage. You have a great chain mover in Michael Pittman gone. That's going to hurt the offense. There's talk of Josh Downs being the other wide receiver in 2 wide receiver sets opposite Alec Pierce. I personally just don't see that going very well for the Colts. And if you have this big offensive regression, which I am expecting, I think Jonathan Taylor will be negatively affected in a really big way. Over the course of his career, he's been a guy who, when the Colts are phenomenal, which they were in 2021 as an offense, they were really, really good. I think they were top 10 in all the efficiency metrics. He was the RB2 in points per game, the RB1 overall, and he scored 22 points per game. This past season, when they were awesome, he was 27.5 points per game. But through this middle area where the Colts have been just kind of mid, dealing with the Anthony Richardson stuff, all this kind of stuff, right? He was good, right? He's a back-end RB1 on a yearly basis, but it's not that phenomenal ceiling, that phenomenal yearly ceiling that I would need to have a guy who's 27 years old ranked any higher than this. So I think on your contenders, if there's somebody who's viewing him as a guy who can, be somebody who you want to put in this Genty Love Hampton Achane tier, I'm happy to sell him at that price because he is 27 years old. I don't expect anywhere near the production that he put up the first half of last season. I expect a ton of regression from the Colts, and that's why I have him just a tick lower than I think the market is viewing him at this point. Moving into the C tier, and it's going to start off with newly extended Breece Hall. A lot of people disappointed with him getting the extension, just the fact that he has to now play on the Jets for the foreseeable future. Wish that he could have ended up somewhere else like Ken Walker, right, in free agency. He's 5th in average annual value with that new contract. I said it with Achane. I think situational stability is always good, even if it's on an organization who is historically really bad. The Jets have made huge offensive improvements, right? They have a really good offensive line. 2 top 12 drafted offensive tackles on either side over the past 3 years. They paid Garrett Wilson, who is an alpha wide receiver 1 that we all really like. First round wide receiver opposite him and Omar Cooper. I still think that a light should be left on for Adonai Mitchell, who is also in that room. First round tight end in Kenyon Sadiq. a second round tight end in Mason Taylor, who was really good in flashes this past year. And at the helm of all of that is Geno Smith, who I truly believe is much better than what he showed as a Raider in 2025. That situation was an absolute disaster. We talked about it with Ashton Genty. And I think that we see a Geno much closer to what we saw when he was great with the Seahawks than what we saw this past season. Now, Frank Reich being the offensive coordinator is not exactly a big confidence booster. I think that Aaron Glenn is a lame duck. I think he's most likely to be the first head coach fired this upcoming year. But I think that the Jets offense could be absolutely competent. I mentioned it with Genty. I mentioned it with Devon Achane. If all that Brees needs to be good for fantasy football, to finish like top 12, I think, is the Jets to not be bottom 10, right? And his volume plus target share, which he should have. And this could be a James Cook effect, right? Where he is looking at a big percentage of the carries the past few years, but could that even increase, right? Could his target share increase in this offense? Could they start to build this offense around Brees because they've paid him this money? I could see it happening 100%. And all he needs, I think, is the Jets to not be a complete dumpster fire. And I think he has a good year. Long term, they are poised to add a quarterback at the top of the 2027 draft. They have 3 first-round picks next year to maneuver with. He's about to turn 25. I think he turns 25 in like a week or so. And I feel really good about Brees Hall. RB10, the extension propped him up to that point. I want to caution people on being so concerned about the Jets right now because so much can change, right? So much can change in a year's time. Chase Brown is going to be my running back 11, a guy that I've been higher on for about a year now than the consensus. Chase Brown's a guy who I really like to look at a specific sample for to get the most juice out of the squeeze, if you will, for what he's able to do for fantasy football. He took over the backfield in week 9 of 2024. That was the year that they brought in Zach Moss. He got hurt. Chase Brown took over. Since then, if you combine all the games, except for the disasters with Jake Browning in 2025, Chase Brown averages 19 points per game. 19. Elite production at the running back position. There are rumors floating around, there have been all offseason, about a contract extension for him. The second that happens, he jumps up a tier. The second he gets that extension, he's in the tier with Ken Walker, James Cook, Jonathan Taylor for me. Very, very easily. You have an elite, high-powered offense, tons of touchdown opportunity, phenomenal floor as a receiver. Last season, he had a 14% target share. I don't expect that to decrease, right? And adding that contract would mean commitment and consistent usage, just like we've seen for James Cook, just like we're projecting for Ken Walker and Brees Hall. That kind of thing is important to me. And if he got that on the Bengals, it would just be absolutely massive for Chase Brown. Jadarian Price is my RB12. I just think that it is impossible to ignore the first-round draft capital. Yes, the analytical profile is bad. Of course it is. He was playing behind the best running back in college football at Notre Dame in Jeremiah Love. But he did look very good in his limited role at Notre Dame. He also returned kicks and looked phenomenal doing that. Was one of the best kick returners and punt returners in the entire country. The 32nd overall pick, it means opportunity more than anything else. Zach Charbonnet will not play until Thanksgiving at the absolute earliest, right? And even then, it's going to be a ramp-up period coming off that late ACL tear. The rest of the running backs on the Seahawks roster have $650,000 of guaranteed money combined in all of their contracts. It's just not a lot of commitment to anybody outside of Jadarian Price, who they spent a first-round pick on. Emmanuel Wilson, George Halani, Kenny McIntosh, this stable of handcuffs does not scare me whatsoever. This should be a really, really good offense again. Even with Kubiak leaving, I think the foundation there with Sam Darnold, JSN, I think Mike McDonald, even though he's a defensive coach, helps with stability for the offense. I think that the fact that the Seahawks are such a good offense is understated in the Jadarian Price conversations. It's all about, he's a bad prospect, this, that, and the other. But he should have a workload pretty much immediately. And he's on a good offense, a team that just won the Super Bowl. So I'm expecting big things from Jadarian Price. I'm trusting the draft capital. I'm trusting the flashes at Notre Dame, and that's why he ends up in this C tier at running back 12 for me. Moving into the D tier, and we're now in the range where you can sway me a lot between all of these guys. I'm not even super confident in the way that I have them ordered. That's why this tier is so large. 7 names here, starting with Kyren Williams. I've talked through this quite a bit with Zach over at Dynasty Land. He thinks that Blake Corum's work is going to continue to increase quite a bit. Kyren's carry percentage did drop from 74% in 2024 to 57%, I believe it was. Yes, in 2025. And Blake Corum looked really good in his opportunity in relief of Kyren, right? But the thing that I think is important here is that Kyren got more efficient as his workload decreased. He even had his receiving work go up a little bit. So I think that they keep feeding the guy with the contract in Kyren Williams. I don't think they're going to be, so involved and so committed to lessening Kyren's workload and increasing Blake Corum's workload. Kyren signed through 2028. And I think that's something that goes a little under discussed is that I think that they want to get the most out of the money that they spend. That seems like a pretty easy thing to imagine, right? So I really don't see this split getting anywhere close to 50-50. I think at best for Blake Corum, at worst for Kyren, it stays the exact same as it was last year. And the touchdowns can kind of go either way. So I still believe in Kyren. I think he's still a good running back to have on your contenders. I know a lot of people don't feel that way. They're worried about Blake Corum. I'm not really in that camp. Bucky Irving at 14. There's been a lot of panic about Bucky going on this offseason. He's coming off a disappointing year, and they add Kenny Gainwell, who had a great breakout 2025 campaign, right? I mentioned it earlier that we often blind ourselves to the full context of a situation by just looking at the season that just happened. Bucky broke out in the second half of his rookie year, and he comes into 2025 with a ton of excitement, right? And right out the gate, he was given the full, complete workload in the offense out the gate in 2025. Huge carry percentage, like 60+% on average. He even had a 14% target share in these first 4 games before he got hurt. Then he misses this huge chunk of the season with the shoulder injury. And when he comes back, everybody else on the offense was hurt as well. I talked about this with Emeka Egbuka in the wide receiver rankings video. Mike Evans was hurt. Chris Godwin was banged up and in and out of the lineup. The offensive line was fully banged up across the board, right? Just like a rotating door at every position there. Baker Mayfield had that shoulder issue down the stretch as well. There was so much going wrong in Tampa that I couldn't possibly expect Bucky to come in and just perform phenomenally for fantasy football, coming off of an injury that he really struggled with into an offense which was completely beat up. Right? Now, the touchdown share, which many people are talking about, I think it's a completely valid concern, right? He had 0 carries inside the 5 in 2025. But I don't think that Kenny Gainwell is the type of running back that would take any of that away. And I will mention this for anybody concerned about the receiving work. I think 8%, it's very low. I'm not exactly sure if it's 8. I wish I would have figured it out before the video, but besides the point, a very, very low percentage of Bucky's receptions came on 3rd down. A lot of his receiving work comes on 1st and 2nd down, just using him as a receiver out of the backfield on early downs. Kenny Gainwell will be that 3rd down and 2-minute drill back. I don't think that takes away from Bucky's receiving work. With the touchdown stuff, I don't think Kenny Gainwell is a goal line bruiser any more so than Bucky is. Sean Tucker, yes, could take some touchdowns. They were going to let the guy walk. They literally didn't re-sign him, didn't tender him or anything. And then nobody else wanted him, so they said, okay, we'll bring you back as our RB3. So I think that Bucky could easily get vultured quite a bit, but I do think that a healthy Bucky Irving gets a really decent share of the goal line touches, which he did as a rookie. He had a ton of carries inside of the 5 as a rookie, a ton of touchdowns as a rookie, and he doesn't need 12 touchdowns to be relevant for fantasy football. He had 8 in his rookie season, 8 rushing touchdowns, and he was the running back 13. So he does not need this massive share of the goal line work. He does not need 12 to 14 touchdowns to be relevant for fantasy football. So I believe in Bucky more than most. I want to calm people on the panic on Bucky Irving. I think he will be fine. I don't think Kenny Gainwell is all of a sudden this big contributor for an NFL team that doesn't roster Aaron Rodgers. And yeah, that's where I'm at with him. Javonte Williams at 15. I'm quite a bit higher than consensus. Zach is as well. Me and him have talked about this a ton on the streams on the Dynastyland channel. It really feels like the market hasn't quite caught up to this new reality after he was so disappointing for 4 years. This is kind of what I talked about with Quentin Johnston in the wide receiver video. It's like this guy was seen as a disappointment, not as much of a bust as Huge because Javonte got hurt, but it's like it takes people a while to be like, okay, no, Javonte's actually just good now and productive. He was set to hit free agency, if you recall, this offseason. Dallas then re-signed him. It's $8 million a year, 3-year deal. Not crazy, not the Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall money, but it's on an offense that we want to be invested in with little to no competition behind him. Malik Davis, Jaden Blue, right? 15 points per game last year is nothing to scoff at. RB12 in points per game, the RB12 overall, played a full season. I don't see why we shouldn't expect the exact same thing for the next 2 years with Javonte Williams, and that's exciting, in my opinion. At 16, Travion Henderson, the upside for him is just through the roof, right? That's really the pull for Travion. It's really concerning to me that he was so outplayed in the playoffs by Ramondre Stevenson. You couldn't possibly, at this point in time in May, project him to be the starter in week 1. It's not something that they've trusted him with. Ramondre is still there. We saw the potential if he gets the full workload, right? This stretch towards the end of the year when Ramondre got hurt. But he has to get better as a runner between the tackles if we ever want to see that over the course of the season without a Ramondre Stevenson injury. Right now, it's just not the case. Right now, you're going to see a lot more of this with some spike weeks, but how are you going to know when to start him unless he really improves between the tackles? It was a bit of a concern with him as a prospect. If you want to believe that he'll take that jump, then I think that he's a phenomenal bet to make. I'm a little concerned about it. Cam Scadaboo is up next. Survives the NFL draft. Obviously, the Jeremiah Love concerns were legit. They were real. The concern now is about the injury for me, as well as long-term job security for him. Now, of course, Jeremiah Love is an incredible talent, and we wouldn't have shunned the Giants or called them idiots for taking a running back at 5 overall because of how talented Jeremiah Love is. But it doesn't mean nothing to me that they were willing to replace Scadaboo like it was nothing, right? This regime, this coaching staff, specifically with John Harbaugh, they didn't draft the guy. So there's no way to tell how committed they are to him. The word from all of the Giants, beat and this kind of stuff is that Cam Scadaboo is healthy and that he's going to be ready to go for training camp, which is exciting. I think he has a good year. The sample of awesome production is really, really small, right? It's just a few weeks in the middle of the year where he broke out before getting hurt. Now, is a major leg injury for a guy that was previously lacking speed, is that better or worse than a guy who had speed as a big element of his game? I tend to think that Scat could potentially afford to lose a step more than a guy like, Jahmyr Gibbs, who has a ton of speed, because he already wasn't a speed guy. So if he's already not winning off of speed and now he's a little slower, but there's also like the lateral quickness and stuff like that's going to be a little worse as he ramps up. I'm just not like 100% certain he's the long-term answer here. I think he'll be good in 2026 once he sort of, gets to 100% after the injury. I'm just a tad worried about his long-term security with the Giants. Another guy who had a big injury this past year, Quinshon Judkins. 3 main worries for me with Quinshon. The slow ramp up, back to 100% off of the gruesome injury. Now, this is a Dynasty video. We're not talking about redraft. So if he's not great for the first 5 weeks, not a big deal. But the Browns project to be a bottom 3 offense in the NFL quite easily, right? Bad offensive line. They added a bunch of pieces this offseason, but no, big names. Leads to a lack of touchdown opportunities. And he wasn't used in the passing game nearly as much as you would have wanted him to be as a rookie. And that's largely because they drafted Dylan Sampson in the same draft as Quinshon, who is really, really good in that third down pass catching role. So you have a guy who is going to be primarily a 2-down back coming off of a major leg injury in a horrible offense. I get that there's more context to it than that, but that just doesn't sound very exciting to me. And I would rather have a bunch of the guys in the tier above him who I think are going to have better years in 2025 and who we're not going to look back on a year from now and say, okay, this is why 2026 was terrible for Quinshon Judkins. I don't think you're going to have to say that with Javonte. I don't think you're going to have to say that with Kyron or Bucky. So that's just why he's a little low for me. I think he's a phenomenal talent. It's just a situational thing. Christian McCaffrey at 19 here. Genuinely, I mean, looking at this tier, if you're like one piece away from your team being a like juggernaut contender, I'm honestly fine moving any of these guys for Christian McCaffrey. I think if I wouldn't do it to like go all in and you're a super old roster, but he's one of these guys, like if I have Christian McCaffrey on a contender, I don't want to sell him because he could win me the league this upcoming year. But I'm also terrified to buy him on contenders if I don't have him. So maybe that just means he's a really strong hold. That's probably where I'm at. He could easily repeat his league-winning form of 2025 this upcoming season, but it's purely year to year with him at this point in terms of a projection. You can't project beyond that because any year legitimately could be his last. Once again, I'm going super long with this video, but I was worried about the wide receiver ranking being an hour long, and people seem to love it. So I'm just going to keep doing my thing, talking, saying as much as I think needs to be said with this. I really appreciate you all for watching. If you're still watching at this point, probably like 40 minutes into this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments who I'm right on and who I'm wrong on with these running back rankings. Moving into the E tier, starting off with Saquon Barkley. He had a really bad 2025 in comparison to his phenomenal 2024 season, of course. I think that 2026 probably lands somewhere in the middle of this, right? He turned 29 this offseason. The Eagles' offensive line and their offense as a whole, I think, should be better, being more healthy this upcoming year. I just don't see like some league-winning upside outcome for him in 2026, like some do from a redraft best ball perspective. And we have to think about that when it comes to Dynasty, because Saquon Barkley's value for Dynasty is really going to be tied to his year-to-year production now, because we're not looking at a 3-year outlook for him, really, because he is 29 years old. So I think some people would compare him to CMC. I just don't see the same high-end outcome for him, and I see a similar, risk of injury and risk of no longer playing kind of thing. Travis Etienne, and I have decided with this, he is Travis Etienne. I am going to call him Travis Etienne. For a long time of the offseason, for anybody who doesn't know, he came out when he signed with the Saints saying that it's actually pronounced Etienne or Etienne. It's just I don't want there ever to be a point where I say somebody's name and somebody doesn't know who I'm talking about. So until it becomes completely mainstream that everybody is saying Etienne, I'm just going to call him Travis Etienne. That's just what I've decided to do. I wanted to respect the man and his name, but you waited too long, unfortunately. So Travis Etienne at 21, he had a really good bounce back in 2025, 15 points per game. He just turned 27 years old. The Saints is a good, not great landing spot. I like Kellen Moore's offenses. I like that they play at a very high pace. Kamara is still there. It's a weird situation with him where they're really beating around, talking about him being on the team. I think Kamara kind of soiled his leverage, saying that he wouldn't play on any other team. And now the Saints are kind of just waiting to cut him. It's a really weird situation. But Travis Etienne should have the full workload there. It's an exciting offense. I like that he got the contract. He probably still has a few years left of this fringe running back one production that he put up last season. He is 27 years old, and so he's down here in the E tier, right next to Josh Jacobs, who I am really bullish on for 2026. Full season in 2025, just under 16 points per game, but he got hurt in week 11, and he never came back fully healthy. When he did come back, he was still nursing the injury. There were games, I remember specifically week 17, where the Packers decided to play him 32% of the snaps, give him 24% of the carries after declaring him active, which was terrible for anybody who started him in their fantasy championships. But before week 11 and the injury, he was awesome. He was the same old elite Josh Jacobs, 19.6 points per game. This is a really good offense that wants to run the ball. That's Matt LaFleur's identity as an offensive coordinator, as an offensive mind. It always has been. And there's currently nothing behind him to take any touches away. Marshawn Lloyd, are we really going to do that again? Chris Brooks, Damian Martinez. They didn't draft a running back in 2026. It's Josh Jacobs' backfield. He had the injury last year, which caused the production to dip. I expect another mid running back one finish for him. And at 28 years old, it is this year-to-year projection, but he's a year younger than Saquon. He's almost 2 years younger than Christian McCaffrey. I think you could see another 2 years from Josh Jacobs, given he's a durable guy. He could play for another 3-4, right? He could be like a Derrick Henry playing at 33 years old. I wouldn't think that's absolutely crazy. And I think he has a really big 2026. Bashal Tutin is my RB23. Of anybody on this list, I think he could easily be the biggest riser in these rankings come a year from now. He was in my To the Moon video that I did a few weeks ago. And it's purely a bet on situation, opportunity, as well as what I thought was a very good prospect. I have the belief that Liam Cohen drafted him to be the Travis Etienne replacement. A year ago, they let Etienne walk, which leans into that argument. And Chris Rodriguez, man, I just don't, he's fine. Look, he's perfectly fine. The efficiency metrics last year were good, but he's just not this great running back who's going to take touches away from a guy who is an elite athlete at the position. Chris Rodriguez is on and off of the Commanders practice squad for the entirety of the start of his career. And then last season, he's only able to get an opportunity because Austin Eckler, 30-year-old Austin Eckler, tears his Achilles, and Bill, the 7th round rookie they just drafted, wasn't playing very well. That's what gave Chris Rodriguez an opportunity. That's what needed to happen for him to get on the field. So I can't just ignore that and say, yeah, Liam Cohen, who coached him in college, gave him $5 million a year, and so he's going to have a big role. Maybe he gets a bit of the goal line stuff, but he has never caught passes, not in college, not at the NFL level. Bashal Tutin will do that. Bashal Tutin is an elite athlete who had the complete workload in college in a really, really high-powered offense that we're excited about. And despite the poor efficiency numbers from Tutin in year one, it's such a small sample. We do this all the time where we let these tiny samples dictate how we think about these players. I thought he looked really good in his opportunity last year behind Etienne, specifically in that playoff game against the Bills, which I just can't get out of my head how awesome he looked. So I'm really big on Bashal Tutin, not only for Dynasty, but for redraft as well. For those of you that don't know, he's like a 6th round pick in redraft leagues right now. People are expecting this to be the RB1 for the offense, at least in best ball. Moving into the F tier, after the Bashal Tutin ramble, Derrick Henry, this could be over any year now, right? 32 and a half years old. Last season was a little down, declined from the big 2024 that he have, but the Ravens offensive line as a whole was really, really bad. I think he has another good year in him, if not 2. This is just a complete outlier in terms of an athlete, in terms of a running back, his size and speed. I think he's a very strong hold on your contenders. I wouldn't even mind sending a 2nd round pick for him, honestly, on my contenders. DeAndre Swift at 25, super solid running back on an elite offense, right? He has never in his career not finished as a top 24 running back. I don't expect that to change this upcoming year, and he's ranked as my RB25 in Dynasty, so fitting. I like Kyle Monangai. I'll mention him in a second, but that's not because I think he's going to take Swift's job. Swift is the RB1 here. I think he'll stay the RB1 here. Great receiving skill set, has a nice little floor there. Should be lots of touchdown opportunities in this offense. I think he's a great buy on your contenders. And another guy I think you should be buying on your contenders is Chuba Hubbard, who 16 points per game just 2 years ago in 2024, where he got that contract extension near the end of it as well. 2025 was just weird. You had the Rico Dowdle takeover, right? Which I hear this all the time now as we're talking about redraft and Jonathan Brooks and this kind of stuff. What happened with Rico Dowdle was Chuba Hubbard got hurt in week 4. Then, immediately following week 4, the Carolina Panthers came up against the 2 worst rush defenses in the entire NFL, in the Miami Dolphins and the Dallas Cowboys before the Cowboys traded for Quinnen Williams. And he absolutely rinsed them, right? It was like almost 400 combined yards over the 2 games, an insane amount of points. You're not just going to give the job back to Chuba, who is nursing an injury. You're not just going to give him the full workload after Rico just did that. So this is the guy that they paid. This is the guy that they committed to with that money. Jonathan Brooks has almost as many ACL tears since like 2023 as he does games played in the NFL. They let Rico Dowdle walk. They were perfectly fine letting Dowdle walk and getting not a ton of money on the Steelers because they have Chuba Hubbard. So he is the starter until Jonathan Brooks somehow shows me otherwise, which honestly I don't think is going to happen. So I really like Chuba. I really like him as a contender buy. Kyle Monangai at 27. I think we could really have 2 relevant running backs for fantasy in this offense. Monangai being that bruiser, that short yardage, goal line, prioritized kind of guy. I think there's a huge potential here for a high roll of touchdowns for Monangai where there's a year where he scores 14 or 15 because I believe so much in this Bears offense. Now, long term, any draft, like next draft should be a good running back class. They could easily add one, right? Absolutely. But I'm not going to decrease my Monangai ranking and how I value him because they could draft a running back next offseason. I think he has a really big year, and therefore I want to be rostering him on my contenders. David Montgomery at 28. I'm not crazy excited for Montgomery on the Texans. I'm a little worried about this offense. They added some pieces to the offensive line, but much like the Browns, that doesn't mean it's going to be good all of a sudden just because they threw a bunch of, starters on it. Stroud looked shaky down the stretch for this offense as well. David Montgomery's about to be 29 years old. You definitely have a starter in this offense. It's not going to be Woody Marks. I just don't know how good that starter is going to be, right? Jonah Coleman at 29. I gave my full Jonah Coleman take in the Rookie My Guys video. Go check that out if you haven't already. I think there's a decent chance he's the running back 1 going into 2027, a year from now, right? He's very versatile in the way that the other 2 aren't. RJ Harvey, I'll talk about him in a second. He's this more receiving profile, not going to get a lot of work on early downs in terms of carries between the tackles. And J.K. Dobbins is not going to do any receiving work. So I also think if Dobbins happens to get injured again, this is the guy who gets the carries. It's going to be Jonah Coleman. They gave the workload to Harvey last year, and he wasn't very good with it. And I think that doesn't go unnoticed. Jaylen Warren at 30. I'm pretty strongly Jaylen Warren over Rico Dowdle. It could absolutely be that this offense isn't good enough for either of them to be relevant. But last year with Aaron Rodgers, Kenny Gainwell and Jaylen Warren were both startable. Now, Warren being the more natural pass catcher than Rico Dowdle, I think a lot of this, check down stuff that Rodgers loves to do will go to him, which all of it went to Gainwell last year, right? Rodgers did seem to trust Jaylen Warren in 2025. I think he could be the one that's PPRing his way to a good finish this upcoming year. RJ Harvey at 31, I mentioned briefly with the Coleman discussion. I really do think that there's a world in which Sean Payton views this guy as an elite pass-catching running back. And he thought that was worth a second-round pick when nobody else really did. And that he doesn't see him as somebody that's ever going to be a 10-carry per game rusher. I think that it's quite realistic that that's what Sean Payton sees. And so that role, if he's getting 5-6 targets a game, a bunch of touchdown opportunity, which there is in this offense. I had Dobbins in the Flock League last year, and Harvey was vulturing him all the time. I think regardless of who is healthy, this role could be a guy you're starting in fantasy football. But there's just no ceiling for me here where he's ever going to have a full workload. And so it's hard to rank him any higher than this. If Dobbins goes down, like I said, I think that Coleman projects far, far better for Dobbins' share of the work than Harvey would. Harvey would probably tick up a little bit in his snaps, but he's not going to be a bell cow ever. And that worries me. In 2026 specifically, thinking through it, I think it's just going to be too messy for anybody to be consistent enough, barring an injury. Dobbins will probably be touchdown or bust. Long term, I think Jonah Coleman and RJ Harvey could be a very fun tandem. Finally, the G tier, our final 9 or so names at the bottom here, starting with Tony Pollard. He still has some juice, I think. He is the solidified starter to begin the year. Nick Singleton is a perfectly fun upside bet to make in your rookie drafts, but he's not he's not a huge threat to Pollard's production. If the Titans are good, if Cam Ward takes a step, if Brian Daboll can get this offense humming, I think that Pollard has a good season. Ramondre Stevenson at 33, he should absolutely be the starter in week 1. Now, how long can he hold it with Travion lurking behind him? Travion really needs to take that step like I mentioned. And if he doesn't, Ramondre's going to be startable pretty much all year. I think he's undervalued. I think people are expecting the Travion step up as opposed to hoping for it, maybe. And I think Stevenson's a really good flex target for your contenders in your deeper leagues, your deeper starting lineups. Blake Corum at 34. I went through it, a lot of it with when I talk about Kyron. I think he's a handcuff plus, right? I don't know if you're really ever going to be sure when to start him without an injury to Kyron, and I don't think it ever becomes a 50-50 split. Rico Dowdle, again, I just think he's going to be the RB2 largely. Maybe it's 1A, 1B. I think Warren gets the bulk of the valuable touches. I think they'll split goal line stuff, and I think Warren gets the bulk of the receiving work. And so where does that really leave Dowdle? I'm not too sure. He's about to turn 28. He's a fine depth running back to roster on your contending teams. With Dobbins, I mentioned it. I think that the touchdown or bust stuff from last year should probably continue. Now you have a younger guy with Jonah Coleman lurking who could take his work without an injury even, but you do have the injury history. They gave him a lot of money. I think, was it $10 million a year that they gave him? I think it's a little weird. I don't know if he would have got that elsewhere. It's just very strange, this 3-headed backfield. I'm really not sure what to expect. But Dobbins, you're probably going to throw him in your lineup as a depth flex option in deeper leagues, and it's just going to be touchdown or bust, which is a difficult place to be, especially with 2 other running backs who can take touchdowns in that backfield. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt at 37, Rachaad White at 39. The Commanders' backfield is probably one of the more important things to get right in 2026 because this offense should be very good. I think they bounce back with Jaden Daniels healthy, and you want the running back who is scoring points on that team. Heading into week 1, I think JCM is probably the early down guy and Rachaad White is the pass catcher. Now, does Rachaad White get some goal line work and then he's getting all of the valuable touches with the receptions and the goal line stuff? I think Rachaad White gets more goal line than the Bill Truthers would want him to. He didn't really get any money, right? It's 1 year, $2 million. People say, oh, he's with his college quarterback. That's why he's there. He's not going to get extra work because it's his college quarterback, if that makes sense. Like, oh, well, it's his college quarterback. It's like, yeah, that's why he's on the Commanders. That's one of the reasons he's on the Commanders. That doesn't mean he's going to get the workload. But I do think he has that receiving role, right? And I'm a Katron Allen guy. I even think that he could overtake Bill at some point. It's not likely, but it's possible for sure. There should be a ton of fantasy goodness in this offense. I just don't feel strongly enough about any of these guys to have them higher than these rankings here. Jonathan Brooks, I talked about it with Chuba. I just don't have as much hope as some other people do for his potential of ever being a relevant fantasy player. Now, the upside is absolutely there. If I'm wrong and they're happy to let Jonathan Brooks overtake Chuba, and Chuba is some like mid, a relevant guy who can be overtaken by anybody. If I'm wrong about that, then yeah, I think Jonathan Brooks is a good bet. But the double ACL tear, the 3 games played in his first 2 seasons, it's just it's an uphill battle for him. It really is. And I think Chuba is solidified enough that this is just going to be a handcuff with upside. Aaron Jones at 40 rounds it out. I think I'm really high on the Vikings this year. And I think that a world exists in which all of their issues from last season are fixed by having just competent to good quarterback play with Kyler. And everybody is just good again. Aaron Jones was not good last year, and it's largely because the offense sucked. Right? So, obviously the injury history, he's 31 and a half years old, but I think he could have a really good season just by the fact that the Vikings are a good team this year when they weren't last season. I think Jordan Mason, it's a similar thing. I think he could have a really good year as the tandem to Aaron Jones, just because the Vikings are better. I think both of those guys are really good targets as depth running back options to target on your contenders for depth, because we know we're going to need that when the season comes and we have to make start-sit decisions on bye weeks and things like that. That'll do it for the running backs. Top 40 I cranked out in this video. Should be a little shorter than the top 60 wide receivers, but I still gave you guys probably close to an hour of me yapping about these running backs. I really appreciate all the support on the videos, but not only that, in the live streams. Been having a ton of fun with those on Saturday nights Once again, please like the video, mean a ton to me. Subscribe to the channel. Check me out on Saturday nights. Turn the notifications on so you don't miss a stream, so that you don't miss a video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.